Oh. Oh. Oh, that's knitting. Well, guess I'm gonna have to learn how to do that.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Let's do it. Hi, I'm Nora, and this is my very first knitting podcast. I'm excited. I'm nervous. It's weird. But just for a little bit of context, I'm coming to you from Connecticut, a little town in Connecticut in the U.S. And I've been watching these knitting podcasts for a little over a year now. I've been knitting since January of this year, 2023. And I've just been wanting to do one of these podcasts pretty much since I started knitting. And I don't really have any knitting friends that I could talk to about it. So I'm really excited to share all the things that I've been working on and plan to work on. And I do hope to make these videos pretty regularly. I got a really fun apparatus set up and my dog is sniffing it right now. So I'm just hoping it doesn't all fall apart. And I'm hoping that I don't melt while I'm sitting here because I shut the air conditioning off for hopefully the best sound possible. So here's hoping this goes well. Let's dive right in. I did make some notes, so many notes that I'm going to share with you. And yeah, let's do it. In typical podcast fashion, I'm going to start with my finished objects, which I think for this first one is going to be a little bit awkward because I could essentially show you everything I've ever knit before. But for the sake of time, I'm going to start with my most recent finished object, which is actually something that I knit for my sister's best friend. Just had her first baby. Oh, see, no. Okay. My sister's best friend just had her first baby, and my sister asked if I would knit something for the baby for her to give to her. And so I asked her what she was thinking for something for the baby. And she mentioned a baby blanket, which that is a work in progress, but it's kind of been in timeout for right now. But the other thing that she had mentioned was a bunny. And so I went looking for just a free bunny pattern. And on Ravelry, I found this pattern. It's called the Snuggle Bunny Lubby by Kayla Pins. It's a free pattern on Ravelry, and I knit it in Barocco Modern Cotton, which is a 60% cotton and 40% rayon blend on 4.5 millimeter needles. This is the bunny. Isn't she sweet? Let's see if it... Oh. So I haven't blocked this yet, but it is just like the sweetest little bunny. It's one of those little lubbies, and it's obviously like a bit of a what's the word that I'm going for here? I don't know. Obviously, it's not like a very clear and obvious bunny. It's just like a little I don't know. But yeah, it's just a sweet little bunny. It was a really quick knit. I started it on August 1st and I finished on August 9th. And that was definitely with a lot of time in between. I think, yeah, so I wound up, you knit from the outside in. So it's knit like a little square, and then it has almost like little glove fingers that you knit as the bunny ears, and then you tie a knot to make the actual bunny head. So I had started on the outside, on the outer square edge, and you decrease towards the center. And as I was decreasing, I thought I was going to use magic loop to do those decreases, but I honestly just decided that I hate magic loop. And so then I was trying to force it on my shorty needles, and obviously that was not going well. And so I had just kind of put it down for a little bit, and eventually I decided to try it out with some DPNs, which I hadn't used. I used them once for a 3-needle bind off for another project, but I hadn't used them otherwise to knit in the round. And so I think I was just nervous to do that. But after getting the hang of it, I have to say that it's my preferred method now for very small circumference knitting. It was super, super easy. I mean, just like easy peasy to get through the end. It should not have taken a week. It honestly probably could have taken a day. It could be knit in a day, but definitely over a long weekend, it could be done. And I think it just came out really, really sweet. The yarn, so it's a worsted weight yarn. The hanks are 100 grams and 209 yards, recommended with a 4.5 millimeter needle. And typically the yarn, the Barocco Modern Cotton, does run around $11 US. And I actually had found it. I love to thrift, and I love finding thrifted yarn. So I had found a brand new hank of the yarn for I think like $3. And I'm not sure. I'm assuming that this is just the undyed white, or just whatever their standard white yarn is, but I did throw out the label, so I'm not 100% sure what it is. I'm also going to measure how much yarn this took, and I will leave that here, but I still have a good bit of this yarn left. As you can see, totally, like, definitely more than half of the hank is left. So yeah, I think for a baby, and I think especially for someone else's baby, for a gift knit, for just something, especially if they're really into the, the very cool baby rooms now where everything's monotone and there's no color, I think that this is a really, really sweet little gift. And to be perfectly honest, I'm probably just going to knit these little bunny loveys until the rest of that skein is gone. On the yarn, it was really nice to work with. I'm guessing that the sort of like soft butteriness comes from the, 40% rayon content. Super bouncy yarn. The stitch definition on it is like just beautiful. I think it almost might be like too defined for a garment personally. Like, I don't know. It has a lot of texture to it, the yarn, when it's knit up, but in this form of the little bunny, I totally love it. I also believe that the DPNs that I had were a 4 millimeter needle. And so the little ears, and as I got very close to the top, but it's all kind of hidden in the knot of the head, I believe that was all done in the 4 millimeter needles. And I think I prefer my personal gauge on the 4 millimeters, where the 4.5 it's just a touch too open. If I didn't mention it already, I haven't blocked this, and I'll probably just give it a quick steam whenever I have my steamer on next. But overall, super, super simple knit, super quick, super easy, adorable. Love it. Highly recommend. And like I said, I would just knit the rest of this yarn into these little loveys and then just have them anytime I have a friend who has a baby, because I'm getting to that age that everyone is. So totally love it. Totally recommend. Free pattern, thrifted yarn, cost me pennies. And that'll be great for my sister's friend for her new baby. So that is the only finished object I am going to show today. And I'm going to move right into my whips. I'll actually start with the whip that I have the least amount of work done on, and that is, I'm going to pull it up on my phone because I did not make notes for this one. Okay, so my next whip is what I have been pronouncing as the Korshavn cardigan by Tanya Hodney, something like that. the pattern on Ravelry is about $6.88 US. I have already knit this pattern once and I absolutely love it. This is intended to be knit on a DK plus lace weight yarn. I haven't knit it yet on with mohair, and I'm also not doing that here. I'm using more of a worsted weight. Needle size is a US 8 or a 5mm, and it's a bottom up construction. And it has this beautiful basket weave texture all over, which I really love. I think especially for me for a cardigan, I will wear a cardigan. It's a V-neck cardigan, just buttoned up with, the bralette underneath. Probably more so than I'll even wear it over something. So I like having the texture because I think maybe if I was planning to wear it mostly over something else, I might want something that's a little more clean and stuck in it. Although if I'm wearing a cardigan over something, it's probably going to be over just a t-shirt. So I think that the texture is really nice and it adds a nice touch to the cardigan. This one does come in 7 sizes. I am knitting it in the size extra large, which has an intended bust circumference of 123 centimeters.
What is 123 centimeters in inches?
So mine should have about a 48.5-inch bust circumference when I'm done. So for me, that's about 8 inches of positive ease, which is perfect for me. And this pattern ranges with a chest size from 96 centimeters to 140 centimeters. Anyway, I'm knitting it in Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool, which is my first time using this yarn, but it was recommended highly by, I was in a test knit earlier this year, and it was one of the yarns that people were recommending for a good budget yarn. So obviously you can buy this at Joann's on Lion Brand's website. What I had done was I knew that the color that I wanted was a really neutral color that I would use a lot. And I had seen that on Joann.com, I could buy it in a 3-pack with a savings to it that I'll have to look up and I'll post. But typically I want to say that a single ball of this at Joann's is somewhere like $12, $13. Regular price, so obviously coupons. But what I had done is I looked it up everywhere. I was like, I'm going to get this yarn for the best deal I can. So I looked it up on lionbrand.com, Joann's. I looked it up on Amazon, and on Amazon I was able to I put it like on a list or in my bag or something. So then daily I was just checking to see if it would go on sale or if a better deal would come up. So, okay. So I don't know if I had mentioned, but my point of saying that me liking it in this neutral color that I knew I would use a lot was that I was comfortable purchasing this in bulk to have extra savings. So on Amazon, I was able to find this yarn in a 6-pack for a better deal. And I put that in my cart and I was waiting. And then one day I woke up and the 6-pack was available for $47.84 for 6 balls of this yarn. So 47. So basically I was able to buy this yarn for about $8 a ball. And in 1 ball of this yarn, you get 227 grams or 465 yards. So let's do that. 465 times 6 equals 2,790 yards for that $48 or so. So the colorway that I got this in is called Oatmeal, and I would say that it's like a gray leaning beige. It has a really nice natural heathering to it with flecks of a lighter, more whitish gray, and then little bits of like a darker, more I don't know, just like a medium tone gray. I think in certain lighting, it definitely looks way more gray than it does in others. Right now in my light, I think it's looking a little bit on the gray side. But I definitely would say that it's like a grayish, taupey, light beige. So I think that I started this on the same day that I started the Lovey. I think that I casted those on the same day. Although I could be really wrong about that. So probably somewhere around the beginning of August. But this has not been my primary whip. I'm actually knitting this to supplement my next whip, which is my so I really haven't been focusing on this at all. I also, because it's knit bottom up, it starts with the ribbing. I'm not interested in knitting ribbing. I also want to say that the yarn has like a musty scent to it. I'm not sure if that's typical of buying yarn on Amazon or if this yarn specifically has this musty scent. It's pretty unpleasant though. So that's also kind of just been, I don't know. I'm not like excited to go work with my musty yarn. But so far I am liking the way that it's working up. This is where I'm at the moment. So like I said, not a ton done. Although when you really look at that, that's a lot of, a long length of ribbing. Because of course being a bottom up cardigan, it's worked flat. And I am currently on my US 6 4mm needles, which is the recommended needle size for the ribbing. I didn't do a gauge swatch for this because I didn't feel like it. Yeah, I didn't gauge swatch. I just dove in. I'm not too concerned about the fit of it. If it's a little too big, I'm not worried about it, is the point. So I believe that in the pattern they say to knit the ribbing for like 2 or 3 inches. At the moment, I probably have like 1.5 inches of ribbing going on. And the first Corshavin cardigan that I made, I did more like 3.5 inches of ribbing. Which I actually do like the look of, especially because I've knit it at a little bit more of like a cropped length. And so I found that extra bit of ribbing has just given me just like that little bit of a cinch at the waist. Not like a actual, like a bomber jacket cinch. I don't want that look. I just like having that little bit of definition at the waist. So I'm probably going to go for somewhere like 2.5 inches of ribbing on this one. Because I don't want it to be quite as much as I did the last time, but I'm happy to have a little extra ribbing. So yeah, this has just been kind of when I'm not in the mood for stockinette anymore. I've been working on this. But the reason I'm knitting this a second time is because I found that the texture pattern, which it is a chart in the pattern, I just really fell in love with it. It was enough purling to kind of break up this. What's your? No, thank you. No, thank you. Yeah, I found that the actual texture of the basket weave has enough purling to break up the stockinette, enough kind of yarn overs, but it's super memorizable. And especially at some point, I think I figured out I was following the chart and I memorized the chart. I didn't understand the chart, if that makes sense. So I had memorized the chart for what it was, but let's say I picked up if I picked up my project halfway through, I would have to reference the chart again and kind of see, okay, I had this many stockinette stitches, or knit stitches, and this many purl stitches. So this must be where I'm at in this chart. But literally, it was like at the very end, I discovered the actual, just the integral part of the chart, what was repeating. After you do X amount of knit stitches, you do this many purls, this many yarn overs, whatever. That finally, like, I internalized that, and it was so frustrating because I was just at the very end and I was like, oh, I didn't even need to have the chart in the same room as me, and I could figure out what was going on. So I was kind of bummed. So I was excited to knit this one again, and hopefully internalize the chart sooner and once I refreshed my memory. Plus, when I knit this the first time around, I used this really pretty like mauvey pink colored yarn, and while I think that's going to be really fun to wear as a top, this one I think will be a little bit more of a layering piece to wear over some other things. So I had mentioned that this is sort of, I'm knitting in supplement to my other whip. And so let's dive into that. And then I'll explain a little bit more about why I'm doing that. So my next whip is my baby at this point. This is actually probably one of the patterns that made me want to start knitting. So I've crocheted for a long time now. A long time. I wasn't like born with a crochet hook in my hand. I started crocheting, I want to say maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. Picked it up, put it down, picked it up, put it down. Really got into it during the pandemic again. And I think that was when I started to see some knitting podcasts come up. And I was watching them even though I wasn't knitting. So I was just I was becoming intrigued by knitting. But I was a little bit nervous to start. When I was little, I have 2 aunts who are very fiber focused, and I have one who primarily crochets and one who primarily knits. But when I was little, they tried to teach me how to knit, and they gave me the yarn and a scarf. You know, they cast on for me and gave it to me and said, here, you know, knit back and forth, have at it. And it was on straight needles. I feel like I could picture it. The needles were that like blue aluminum needle that probably everyone's grandmother has. And the yarn was, oh, I know you've seen it. It's that like brownish purple, you know, not marled, but like a heathered. And it has that thread that runs through it, but then the little, the like unspun fiber that sort of squiggles and zigzags in and out of that thread. If you're teaching someone how to knit, please don't teach them on that yarn. That was like the biggest nightmare for someone who doesn't know what they're doing, and your needle's going through that little textured swirl. It was terrible. And I dropped stitches and I picked up stitches, and the scarf went like this. Doesn't everyone's like their first project? So anyway, that was like, yeah, probably 15 years ago or so. So after that experience, I was like, knitting is very difficult. I'll stick to my crochet hook because that was very easy for me. But anyway, so I had seen some knitting podcasts, and then I think Instagram caught on to what was happening and started recommending some things to me, and I saw this dress. And I was like, oh. Oh, that's knitting. Well, guess I'm going to have to learn how to do that. And I see now that to someone from looking from the outside, you're like, that was the project that made you want to start knitting. Because it's very simple and basic, but at the same time, it's a lot of knitting. And so here we are. This is one of my dream knits. I've got another one planned for the end of the year. But this is one of my dream knits. It's a big project to take on, but I just love it. I'll tell you a little bit more about why in a second. So, like, without further ado, this is the All Good dress by Magdalena Parker, Knitonomy, as you'll see her on Instagram. She is probably my favorite knitwear designer. I test knit her Minto sweater earlier this year, And honestly, everything that she designs, I think I feel similarly to her as most people do to Petite Knit. I have not yet knit anything from Petite Knit. And I might one day, but I think I have to go through Magdalena Parker Knitonomy's repertoire before I start on the petite knit journey. So anyway, it's the All Good dress. On Ravelry, it's a $9 pattern US. And it is knit on 3mm needles. It's available in 7 sizes with finished bust ranging from 110 centimeters to 150 centimeters, which is also 43 inches to 59 inches, with an intended positive ease of, not 130 centimeters, dear God, of 30 centimeters or 11 to 12-ish inches. I am knitting the size large for an intended finished bust of 130 centimeters or 51 inches, which gives me about 11 inches of positive ease. And hers is recommended to be knit in the Knitting for Olive Merino. So I'm knitting this, like I said, in a size large. I'm using the Let's see if we can get Google to tell me how to pronounce this. Yeah.
The following pronunciation. Garn.
Cardigan? That's my best shot. Okay. Cardigan? Lana Cotton? Lana Cotton, like what a contrast. 212 in the color 0809. I really don't like when we don't have like fun names for colorways because that speaks my language. So my yarn is 50% superwash merino and 50% cotton. For my size large, it calls for 650 grams of the Knitting for Olive merino, and I bought 14 balls of this, we're just going to say Lana Cotton, at 50 grams each, so I have 700 grams. I bought them from the website Linda Hobby, which I placed a really big order on, and in my upcoming episodes, you'll see the other projects that I have planned. I decided to just kind of figure out exactly what I wanted to knit the rest of the year and do a big bulk purchase of yarn so that I could get some of the drops yarn. So Linda Hobby was the website that I used, really had a good experience, would totally use them again. And so I bought, like I said, 14 balls, 50 grams each at $5.30 a piece. So I'm in this project for $70-ish, somewhere around there. And at this point, I am down to about 2.5 balls of yarn. So I'll have to see kind of where we're at. Anyway, this dress is a drop shoulder construction top down dress. It has that kind of like trapezoid back. None of my ends are woven in. And it's intended to have that boxy fit and come down close to the ankles, kind of like somewhere between a midi and a maxi length, which is my favorite fit of dress, which is why when I saw it, I just knew that this was the dress for me. So it is worked flat on the back in that trapezoid style, top down until you hit that underarm point. Then you have the option to either pick up the stitches from the shoulders and work your way down from, shoulder to shoulder, cast on in the middle, or she specifies in the pattern if you like the more seamed look, which personally I think just tends to lean a little bit more store-bought looking. You can cast on your shoulder, cast on those few stitches in the middle once you've knit your way down, and then seam it to the back. So that was also the construction for the Minto sweater. And both times I've opted to seam it together because I just feel like, also with this one actually, especially since it is such a long dress, I imagine it's going to get, pretty heavy. So I figured that having that seamed shoulder would just add any extra stability that I could get. I don't think that my seams came out perfectly. It was Kitchener stitched together, which that was a new one for me. And I can't say I did the best job, but I'm not too upset with how it looked. From that point, pick up and knit in the round for the sleeves, and pick up and knit a ribbed collar. So I had done my collar before finishing the sleeves so that I would know exactly how long I wanted the sleeves after the collar was kind of as cinched as it was going to be. And it's finished with an Italian bind off, which I have a love-hate relationship with. I love it because I think it looks really good, but I don't love the process of it. I've gotten better at it, and I've sped up a bit, but it's not something that I can do very, very quickly. So I'm getting better at it, but I do just really like the look of it. And I was really glad because I was able to do mine with a lot of stretch. On my Minto sweater, that has a folded down collar, and I struggle to get it over my head, and I think it's because I seamed it down really tightly. So the finishes on this one, I've just been trying to get a lot more stretch out of them without them looking really loose and silly. So ribbed collar with that Italian bind off hem. And then in my sleeves, I actually cut my sleeves a little bit short. I knew that I wanted my sleeves. Actually, the dress that I have on right now is pretty much the exact fit of my All Good dress. And I actually bought this thinking, okay, let me make sure that I really like the fit and style of this dress and that I'll wear it as much as I think I will before I embark on this crazy knitting journey. So I do. I like the sleeve length on this dress. They come up when my arm is relaxed, maybe like 2 inches before the crook of my elbow. And that was about where I imagined this dress fitting. I figured my desired length would actually probably be if it could sit right in the crook of my elbow so that when I fold it, it doesn't get kicked up, but so that it just had a little bit more coverage. And I was actually surprised that with the pattern, I knit my sleeves, I want to say 7 rounds shorter than she specifies to in the pattern for my size. Because when I tried it on, I was finding that it was at the right length. So I decided to go with that length. And the sleeves, this was my first time doing a folded hem. And so the way that she has you do it in the pattern is that you knit that purl row for that turning edge, and then you knit 7 inches is the fold up that you get on the inside. And then this was my first time doing the folded hem. I looked up a few different ways to do it. She does leave a video tutorial in the pattern. And my only issue with her tutorial, she's very clear in showing what she's doing, but she doesn't speak at all. And I will just second guess it if I don't hear someone confirming what I think I see happening. So I tried looking up other videos, but I was struggling to find something that would really work. So I did it. I'm really happy with how it looked. The way that I wound up doing it was first at the purl row, knit those 7 extra rows. Then I transferred all of my stitches onto a larger needle. So my sleeves I knit with the 3mm needle, and I put those onto, I think, a 4mm needle. And then I took my original 3mm 40 centimeter, like the shorties. Took that original needle and I scooped up all of the stitches that I was going to be seaming onto. And that was the part that I was the most nervous about. And the first time I did it, the whole process from picking up those stitches to seaming it down and cutting my yarn in the end, it took me like 2.5 hours for one sleeve. I was really nervous about it, but I went in, I scooped up all those stitches and then folded up. So I had 2 needles parallel to each other. And then I took a third needle. I actually used my double pointed needle in that 4mm needle. I was really nervous that I was going to knit this too tight. So I was just going for bigger needles. And I used that as the third needle to do, I think that would be like a 3-needle bind off. But seaming it down while you go by knitting the 2 stitches from the 2 parallel needles together onto your right hand needle, doing that twice, and then scooping the, having 2 stitches on the needles, scooping the second stitch over and dropping it, locking in those stitches as you go. And I am so pleased with how it came out. As far as just the looseness, there's still plenty of stretch here. And obviously it's not blocked right now. But my concern, and I'm gonna seam block it and see what happens. My concern is that unblocked, I'm getting this flipping out. And I looked through everyone's Ravelry to see if anyone else was having the same issue. And based on what I could see in people's photos, it looked like a lot of people, their sleeves do have that slight kick out in the end where it's folded up. And that's just something that will bother me, I know. So the hem of the dress is also finished with a folded hem, and I like how crisp it looks. But I'm concerned, I think on the sleeves, the flipping up wouldn't bother me as much as if it did that on the hem, I wouldn't wear the dress. It would freak me out. I would hate that. And I am getting close to the hem, so let's just go ahead and show. So. I am very close to the end here. And I'll just have to put some cutaways. But as I approach the hem, I'm trying to think about what I can do to ensure that my hem doesn't flip up. And I think it was one of the test knitters on Ravelry, she specified that she swapped out the folded hem for a double knit hem. And she says that it gives her the same look. So instead of purl row, knit 7 rows, fold up, she cast on so that she had double the amount of stitches, double knit 7 rows, and then Italian bind off. So I have 2 questions that I want to pose. A, as far as I've done the Italian bind off, it's been with 1x1 ribbing. And I've just been confused when it comes to Italian bind off versus tubular bind off. If those are synonymous, are those the same thing? Are those 2 different things? Are people switching out the terms? Because I don't know how I would do an Italian bind off the way that I know to do it without having a 1x1 rib. So A, can I do an Italian bind off on stockinette in general? Curious. B, does anyone have a recommendation on how to avoid that flipping out on a folded hem? Right now, the theory that I'm planning to test on the hem, unless someone has a better idea, I like the idea of the double knit, but I'm not 100% confident in that Italian bind off on stockinette. So my thought is to knit to my desired length, pop in the purl row, and then drop down my needle size from the 3mm, I think, to a 2mm. Because my theory is that this is where my sleeve is seamed down on the inside, obviously. And so you knit your sleeve to your desired length, and any hem, knit to the desired length, pop in that really crisp little purl row to help it fold pretty, and then you knit, in this case, 7 rows and seam it down. I think because these 7 rows and these 7 rows want to take up the same circumference, when you seam it down, it has no choice but to want to kick out because there's not like enough room inside the hem to house this extra bit of stitching. So my theory is that if I do my purl row and then switch to a 2mm needle instead of 3mm to knit these stitches, it'll want to suck it in a little bit, which would then, see how right now when I hold it straight, it's like flaring up? I think it'll slightly suck that in. And in theory, that would give me a more straight hem without getting that flipping. So those are my questions. What would you recommend for a folded hem to avoid it kicking out? And those are kind of the ideas that I have. So I've done 2 minutes of research into it and haven't come up with any concrete plan yet. So those are my questions. This is my all good dress. I started knitting this on July 10th, and I really ambitiously thought that I was going to be able to get it done. I don't know, to wear during August. That didn't happen. And so that's why I started knitting the Korshavn cardigan, is to wear and pair with specifically with this dress. So that's kind of the color story I've got going on. And that was why I wanted a cardigan that was particularly textured, because I think that extra, like the bulkier yarn matched up with that fingering weight yarn is going to give me a really nice contrast, because sometimes I think knit on it is a touch cringy. So my goal is to make it not so cringy by having the contrast. As far as this pattern goes, I love it. I love anything Magdalena Parker knits on me. And I actually hadn't intended on casting this on when I did. I was working on a lace pattern that's in hibernation now. So I'm a bridal hairstylist. And so most people, talk about having their summers to have all of this time for knitting. And I think a lot of people in the summer are casting on project, and they have all these things going on because most people have this summer to chill. So I thought I was going to be the same way. And that wasn't the case. My summers, I have very limited brain capacity. It's my first summer knitting, so I should have known that going into it, but it didn't occur to me until I completely screwed up that lace pattern. And I thought, I need stockinette around. So I think if you're someone who, I would say if you're like a teacher, if you're going into a season of your life when things are going to get a little bit chaotic and you just want old reliable stockinette on the needles, this is the pattern. I've thoroughly enjoyed every stitch of this 3mm needle stockinette midi maxi dress. It's been my saving grace throughout the summer. I take it and I ball it up and I stuff it into my backpack that I use as my purse, and I bring it everywhere I go. And I don't find it to be cumbersome because it honestly, it's fingering weight cotton. Like, it can sit in my lap even now that it's almost done. And I can just get those stitches on it whenever I have a second. My favorite thing lately is to show up to a wedding 30 minutes early, and I'll sit in my car and I'll get my little bit of knitting time in while I finish my coffee and I chill before I enter the chaos. So if you're in a particularly busy season of your life, if knitting isn't really speaking to you right now, highly recommend a project that's just stockinette around. And to be honest, the fingering weight too. This is my first fingering weight project. And when I pick up my bigger needles, I almost wonder how I knit with them because I just found this to be so comforting. Speaking of needles, so I have a Knit Picks wooden interchangeable set that just seemed like the most reasonable thing for me to buy when I started knitting. I think for a beginner, the wood needles are great because they give a little resistance and you're not just slip sliding all over the place. But as I've gotten more comfortable with knitting, I do think at some point I'm going to switch to metal needles. But those only go down to, I think, a 4mm needle. So for the 3mm, I needed to get something else. And I wanted to try going with something that was interchangeable still, rather than buying a fixed. I didn't know how often I would actually use a fixed full, 40-inch circumference needle. So I grabbed the Knitter's Pride carbons and the 3mm, and those fit on my Knit Picks interchangeable cables. And I have to say, I haven't loved these needles. You can see that there's I guess the carbon part is the black part, and then there's some sort of metal tip and base where it actually screws into the cable. And I haven't found those seams to be particularly seamless. Not that they've caught the work and they haven't caused me any issues, but I have felt it every single time I've pushed my stitches up the needles, and it could be better. So I don't know if that's just something to expect with metal needles. I don't know. The seams are pretty obvious. In my hunt for now, looking for interchangeable metal needles, the Knitter's Pride carbons came up, and I wouldn't consider them because it's unpleasant enough that if I'm investing in needles, I just wouldn't get those. That being said, to knit the sleeves and the neck, I needed some 40 centimeter or 40mm? That shorty length. Needles. I bought a ChowGoo fixed needle for the 2.5mm that you use for the ribbing. And then I also purchased for the sleeves, I think it's Addi Turbo, I think. 3mm needles to get that small circumference and magic loop. I'm not doing it. And I have to say, of those two, I think I preferred the Addi Turbo. I think that's what I threw out the packaging after I bought it versus the ChowGoo. So another question I have for people is the ChowGoo needles, and these are the fixed ones again in that 40mm circumference. Looking at those up against even these Knitter's Pride carbons and up against these Addi Turbos, they're not as shiny. And I don't know if that's the material, but they have almost that more like matte finish to them that causes this like very subtle sound when I'm knitting with them that I don't love. And I'm wondering if it's just that particular fixed needle that does that. Are all the ChowGoo needles like that? Am I being crazy? I don't know. Everyone loves ChowGoo. So I was like, here I go. I'm gonna get the ChowGoos. And I didn't see the hype. Maybe it was just me. And yeah, those are my thoughts on that. I think that's everything that I have to say about this. My plan and my goal is to hopefully finish this by the next time I do my podcast, which I'm hoping to do weekly. So I'm hoping that the next time you see this is done. And if it's not done, it should only be because I have the hem left to do and maybe I'm still undecided on how I'm doing that. So please leave your recommendations down below. And we can embark on this adventure together of a good folded hem option. So I'll be knitting on this for the rest of the day. Totally love it. At this point, I do think I've been at it for almost an hour. And here I was like, oh, it's my first knitting podcast. What could I possibly have to talk about? So we'll have to edit a little bit after today. But I also think I'm I'm giving you like a lifetime's worth of progress instead of just a week. So I'm assuming after this podcast, that we should shorten the process a little bit. But we've done our finished objects, we've done our whips, and so naturally we're going to move on to plans/acquisitions, which for me are going to go hand in hand this week. Hand in hand. So like I mentioned, I'm a bridal hairstylist, and it's been a really, really, really busy season, which is phenomenal. It's great. I'm happy to be busy. And I've been working a lot. So I decided to reward myself, as we do, with some yarn. So a little bit of backstory. This year, for my birthday, which is in March, I planned and forced my boyfriend to join me on a great knitting tour of Connecticut. So I looked up yarn stores around us, and I planned out a little knitting road trip that was an hour long. The furthest shop was an hour away, and I think we stopped at 5 or 6 knitting yarn stores that day. And it was really fun. And at the time, I was shopping specifically for yarn for my Minto sweater by Knitonomy, Magdalena Parker. And to be, this will be punny in a little bit, perfectly frank, I think I was just really overwhelmed. Prior to knitting, so in crochet, I never bought fine yarns or anything more really than acrylic and cotton. And so I was like, oh, I want to go get nice yarn for my sweater, not realizing, I think that sweater called for like 1,200 grams of yarn. And I literally said that to one of the women in the yarn shop, and she said, I think you need 1,200 yards. And I said, no, it says 1,200 grams. Which is another tangent. Ooh, this could get tangenty. I didn't realize I'd be very comfortable talking to a camera, and I shouldn't have had coffee before this because I feel like I'm just about to tell you my whole life story. But yarn shop tangent in another video. So I was pretty overwhelmed, and wound up not purchasing any yarn from any of those shops that day, and literally went to Hobby Lobby and found a sale and just bought all of that yarn instead, which I stand by my decision because I was knitting a cabled sweater. I had never done that before. It was the test knit, and I just didn't know how often I'd wear my, love the sweater. I'm glad that I experimented a little bit on the cheaper yarn. However, so yarn shop after yarn shop, I'm looking for yarn, really went into it knowing I would splurge a little bit for my birthday, but for me, splurging was not going to be a $500 sweater. Sorry, the fibers from this yarn is like eating my nose. So I learned that day. It was a good lesson to learn. And I also want to note that I completely respect and understand the prices of yarn, and hope to one day splurge on a $500 sweater. Currently, it's not where I'm at in my knitting journey, my life. It's just not where I'm focusing my money. Which I don't feel the need to defend that. I think it's okay. If you don't want to knit a $500 sweater, that's okay. All that being said, geez, yarn shop after yarn shop, I kept picking up this yarn, and I was like, this color's perfect. This is exactly what I want. Every single time, it was Malabrigo yarn, Rios, no, in their colorway, Frank Ochre, which, rewind, to be perfectly frank.
This will be punny in a little bit.
I picked it up in every single yarn shop thinking that it was going to be something different. And it was the same freaking thing every time. And again, newer knitter, overwhelmed by the yarn prices, by the options, everything. But I did say, like, that's the dream. And so after having a really busy bridal season this year, I was like, I'm going to go treat myself. And my favorite yarn shop of the ones that I toured that day was the Yarn Barn. And they had this really fun summer sale all summer where every week one color of yarn was on sale. And I believe it was 20% off for the whole week. So I was like, oh, when yellow goes on sale, I'm going to the Yarn Barn. And I did. And I left with nothing because I immediately was like, I don't need it. I don't need it. I just need it. No, I don't need it. We went back that weekend and I bought my new friend Frank Oker. So I had every intention of purchasing the Rios after falling in love with that during our yarn tour. But while I was there, this one was speaking to me. So it's the Malabrigo Sussurro, something like that. It's a 50% silk, 25% merino, and 25% linen blend. Single ply DK/sport weight. And it was just so pretty. I don't know. It was right there next to the Rios, and it was speaking to me. And I thought, you know what? If you're gonna treat yourself, like treat yourself. Now, they only had 3 of these bad boys in stock. And I was like, I'm a big girl. I usually require a lot more yarn to cover my body than that. But then it dawned on me. Everyone's always talking about how the ranunculus doesn't use a lot of yarn. And I was like, I'm hopping on board with the trends. So consider me on the ranunculus train. Choo choo, here we go. I'm going to knit the ranunculus, and I've been waiting because I've been really wanting to film this podcast. And I said, you will not cast on that ranunculus until after you filmed, and I should post it first, your first podcast. So this is my gift to myself for working really hard this summer and for filming this podcast. So I am going to knit the ranunculus like everyone else in the world by Midori Hirose, intended to be knit on US 10 or 6mm needles. It's available in 11 sizes ranging from 117 to 180 centimeters or 46 to 70.75 inches. What's so fascinating about this sweater to me, and like I don't believe it yet. I'll believe it when I see it. But the short sleeve version calls for, in the largest size, so the maximum size is 722 yards. And the long sleeve largest size would call for 941 yards of yarn. I have 300 grams of yarn, which in this yarn is equivalent to 975 yards. So I have big plans. I also just want to mention that this Malabrigo Sussurro yarn is typically about $25 a hank, and I bought 3 for about $60 with the sale that the Yarn Barn had going. So I feel really good about it. And my intention for this ranunculus sweater for me is not to really be a sweater. I want something that can act as like a long sleeve shirt. Like I said, I live in Connecticut, so we have our seasons change, but I think most of the time I don't need a bulky sweater. Most of the time I don't need a tank top. Most of the time I need a t-shirt or just like a really thin long sleeve is my favorite. So being that this has that silk and linen in the yarn, I feel like this will be the perfect sweater to have as just a more, not fitted, but more close to skin long sleeve shirt. And I had seen someone on Instagram, and I can't find it now, who knit the ranunculus in a very similar colorway to this Frank Oker yarn. And I thought, that's perfect. So my goal for my ranunculus is to have somewhere under 10 inches of ease. And I haven't gauge swatched for this yet, but I might be playing around with knitting a larger size on a smaller gauge, or more stitches per inch, because the one thing that I know that this pattern says that you can knit it with lace weight up to, bulky whatever on those US 10, is it US 10 or is it on the 6 millimeter needles. I don't want a crazy open gauge in the stockinette portion of this. And this is recommending that you knit it on a 3.5 to 4.5 millimeter needle. So the yarn itself. So yarn recommends a 4.5 millimeter needle. Pattern is saying 6 millimeter needle. I think I'm gonna do a gauge swatch in either a 4.5 millimeter or a 5 and math it out so that I have the fabric that I want first, and then I'll knit from there. Intention is to have long sleeves. I haven't gone too thoroughly through the pattern yet, but I know people say that it's a, pick and choose kind of as you go. I think my preferred fit for this is going to be to have a long sleeve that has a slight balloon to it, not a massive one. And I'm thinking bracelet length sleeves. That tends to be for a long sleeve what would be ideal for me, because I'll wind up pushing them up if they're too long. So I'm really excited. My goal is to cast this on, or at the very least to have the gauge swatch done by my next podcast. So I'm really, really excited about that. And that does it. So that is all I have knitting related today. My goal is to film weekly podcasts. I also have some ideas for other videos sprinkled in between. I would love to know if you're watching this. First of all, thank you for sticking with me, because I'm sure that this is going to be a long video. Personally, I love long knitting podcasts, and I just like to play them in the background while I'm knitting. I don't even usually watch them. I just listen. So I would love to know if you could comment down below the day of the week that you feel like you have a void in your knitting podcast repertoire. I would be really curious to hear what day of the week would be good for you for an upload. My plan is to upload on Saturdays, but I'm flexible with my schedule. And so I would love to just know what would be a good day for you. And I really hope that you enjoyed watching. If there's anything that I could do to make this better, or just, I don't know, just more to your liking, I would be curious to know. So you tell me what's working for you and what's not. And yeah, I hope to hang out with you again soon. Like I said, I'm Nora. I did start a new Instagram account for my knitting podcast. Right now, there's absolutely nothing on that Instagram account, but I plan to post in tandem with this video being posted. So, yes, you can find me at AKA Nora Knits on Instagram. And yeah, that's all I've got for you this week. So thank you for hanging out with me. I hope to see you again soon. Happy knitting, happy fall almost. And yeah, just big ol' thanks for watching.